The scorching afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked asphalt of the rundown city street. The distant hum of traffic mixed with the low murmur of voices, but beneath it all, a suffocating tension hung in the air, an unspoken storm waiting to break. At the corner, near the faded walls of the neighborhood school, stood a young black girl named Maya, clutching her books tightly, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and defiance. She knew the eyes watching her weren't just curious, they were filled with suspicion, judgment, and something far darker. Among the crowd, two figures emerged from the shadow of a nearby police car. One was Officer Daniels, a white man with cold eyes that held no mercy. His uniform was spotless, but beneath the badge lurked a dangerous cruelty, sharpened by years of unchecked prejudice. Beside him walked Officer Grant, his partner, younger and more reserved, whose gaze flickered with uncertainty as he surveyed the scene. Maya's fists clenched tighter as she sensed the storm about to erupt. She wasn't just a girl walking home from school. To Officer Daniels, she was an easy target, a symbol of everything he despised. To Officer Grant, she was a test of his conscience, a line he hadn't yet dared to cross. "Hey, kid," Daniels barked, stepping forward with a cruel sneer. "What are you doing here? Huh? You know this isn't your place." Maya swallowed the lump in her throat but refused to back down. "I'm just going home." Daniels laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed off the walls. "You think you belong here? Think again." The crowd fell silent, holding their breath as the tension spiraled dangerously high. Grant shifted uneasily, his fingers twitching near his holster, torn between loyalty and justice. In that moment, the air thickened with impending violence, a brutal dance of power, prejudice, and the fragile hope that justice might still find a way. The moment hung heavy, thick like a storm cloud ready to burst. Officer Daniels' cold eyes locked onto Maya with a ferocity that froze the very air. His voice, sharp and cruel, cut through the silence like a whip. "You think you can talk back? You think you're better than us?" His words were venom, dripping with hatred that had festered for years. Maya stood her ground, her chest rising and falling rapidly as she fought to steady her trembling hands. Pain wasn't just in her body, it was etched deep in her soul. Every insult, every stare from the crowd, every whisper of judgment weighed on her like chains. Suddenly, Daniels lunged forward. The first blow was brutal and unexpected. A harsh grip seized her arm. Maya gasped. The sharp crack of bone breaking echoed in her ears, a sound far more terrible than any shout. Her vision blurred, tears burning her eyes, but her spirit refused to shatter. The crowd gasped, some frozen in shock, others unable to look away. Children's cries mingled with whispered curses. Maya's broken arm hung limply by her side, but she still stood, defiant despite the agony. Officer Grant watched, frozen in conflicted horror. His heart hammered painfully as he saw the cruelty unfold before him. He had sworn an oath to protect, but his silence now felt like betrayal. His mind raced. Was this the moment to finally act? Daniels sneered, tightening his grip, his voice low and merciless. "You're nothing, just another troublemaker to me." The cruelty in his eyes was a mirror to a world Maya had already learned to fear, a world where color marked you guilty before any crime was committed. But within her, beneath the pain and humiliation, a fierce flame burned bright. She would not be broken. As the murmurs of the crowd swelled into chaos, a single figure stepped forward, Officer Grant. His face was taut with determination, and for the first time, his voice cut through the noise like steel. "Enough," he said, his tone cold but resolute. "This stops now." The moment was electric. All eyes turned to him. For the first time, a crack appeared in the armor of the corrupt system. The battle lines were drawn, not just between two officers, but between cruelty and conscience, hate and justice. The city seemed to hold its breath. Word of the incident spread through the neighborhood like wildfire, carried on whispered conversations and anxious glances. But despite the outrage simmering beneath the surface, an oppressive silence blanketed the streets. Maya sat on the cracked steps of her small apartment building, her broken arm wrapped tightly in a rough cloth. Pain radiated through every nerve, yet her eyes burned with fierce determination. Around her, the world moved on, indifferent or afraid to confront the ugly truth. Neighbors exchanged uneasy looks but kept their distance. Mothers pulled their children inside. Doors slammed shut with hurried finality. The vibrant hum of the community was replaced by a heavy quiet, as if the very air was weighed down by fear. In the local grocery store, hushed conversations buzzed beneath the fluorescent lights. Some blamed Maya, whispering about troublemakers and bad choices. Others shook their heads in sorrow, but none dared to raise their voices. Meanwhile, Officer Daniels walked the same streets with a smug arrogance, shielded by the badge and a code of silence enforced by his peers. His cold smirk was a silent challenge to anyone who might think to stand against him. But the real battle was unfolding inside Officer Grant's mind. Each sleepless night was a war zone of guilt and resolve. He replayed the scene over and over, the sound of Maya's arm snapping, the look of pain twisted into defiance in her eyes. He couldn't turn away, couldn't silence the voice inside screaming for justice. Yet, outside, the system remained unyielding. Reports were filed, but buried beneath piles of bureaucracy. The police department closed ranks, protecting their own, dismissing complaints as hearsay. Grant found himself isolated, watched closely by colleagues who saw his hesitation as betrayal. The pressure mounted, whispers followed him like shadows. His family worried, friends distanced themselves. Standing up meant risking everything. Despite this, Grant's conscience refused to be silenced. He knew that justice wasn't just a word, it was a fight, and the price would be high. Back on the streets, Maya's quiet strength inspired those few who dared to notice. A small group of neighbors began to gather, sharing stories, fueling a growing fire of resistance. They spoke in low voices of courage, hope, and change. But darkness loomed, and the silence of the streets was only the calm before a coming storm. Let's take a short pause here. Please write in the comments where you're listening to our stories from and if you've ever experienced something similar in your life. Don't forget to subscribe to stay updated. We will continue shortly. The nights grew colder, but inside Officer Grant's small apartment, a storm raged fiercer than any winter chill. He sat hunched over his worn desk, the faint glow of a single lamp casting long shadows that flickered like the doubts tormenting him. Papers were scattered, reports, anonymous tips, messages from the few who dared to believe in truth, every word a thread pulling him deeper into a fight he never expected but could no longer deny. He remembered the moment clearly, Maya's broken arm, the harsh crack, the defiant glare that refused to bow. That image haunted his dreams and sharpened his resolve. Yet, standing up against Daniels meant stepping into a world where loyalty to the badge was blind and unforgiving. At the precinct, the atmosphere turned poisonous. Whispers followed Grant like vultures circling a wounded prey. His colleagues who once greeted him with nods now avoided his gaze. Emails went unanswered, phone calls ignored. The weight of isolation pressed down, heavier than any badge could protect against. His captain summoned him one evening, a private conversation under the flickering fluorescent lights of the empty station. The words were clear, cold, and chilling. Drop this, Grant. You're playing a dangerous game. It's your word against his, and the department stands behind Daniels. But Grant's heart burned with a fire that neither threats nor fear could extinguish. He had taken an oath to protect and serve all, not just those who fit a narrow definition of worthy. The walls closed in, but his spirit broke free. Outside the station, the neighborhood simmered with unrest. The small group rallying around Maya grew, their voices rising from whispered solidarity to urgent chants. Flyers were passed hand to hand. Social media buzzed with calls for accountability. The pain of one had ignited the courage of many. Yet danger lurked in every shadow. Anonymous threats slid under Grant's door. Tires were slashed outside his home. A broken window. A cruel message scrawled in angry red paint, traitor. The pressure was immense. Each step forward meant risking not just his career, but his life. But retreat was impossible. In quiet moments, Grant found strength in unexpected places, the resolute eyes of Maya's mother, the unwavering support of a few trusted friends, and the silent prayers whispered beneath the breath of those who believed justice must prevail. The battle lines were no longer just drawn between two officers. It was a war waged in courtrooms, on city streets, and in the hearts of every person watching, hoping for change. Grant's resolve hardened into steel. No matter the cost, he would see justice done. The price was high, but the stakes were higher. The pressure was suffocating. Every day, Officer Grant felt the walls closing in tighter around him. The once familiar precinct had turned hostile, a battlefield of silent glares, cold shoulders, and whispered threats. His every move was watched, every conversation dissected. Even the air seemed thick with betrayal. Yet, amid the growing isolation, Grant's resolve only hardened. He knew that breaking his silence would come at a cost, but remaining silent was a betrayal of everything he believed in. One evening, after a grueling 12-hour shift, Grant returned home to find an envelope slipped under his door. The handwriting was scrawled and menacing. "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." His hands trembled as he clutched the note. The threat was clear, but fear was no longer his master. It was a call to arms. The following day, tensions exploded in the streets. News of Maya's injury had spread beyond the neighborhood. Activists, journalists, and everyday citizens poured into the streets demanding answers. The air buzzed with chants, signs waving defiantly against the grim backdrop of city buildings. Inside the precinct, Daniels sneered at the protests, shielded by a system that rewarded silence and punished courage. But even he sensed the tide turning. One fateful afternoon, the breaking point arrived. Grant stood face to face with Daniels in the station's dimly lit corridor. The air between them crackled with years of pent-up hatred, fear, and defiance. "You're finished, Daniels," Grant said, voice low but steady. "This ends now." Daniels laughed, a sound void of humor and full of menace. "You think you're a hero? You're a fool. Nobody wins this fight." The confrontation was brutal. Words turned to shoves. Years of corruption clashed with the faint hope of justice. Nearby officers formed a tense circle, watching, waiting for the explosion. But Grant did not back down. He had reached his limit. That night, with evidence in hand and a heart steeled by pain and conviction, Grant made the decision to go public. He contacted an investigative journalist, revealing everything: the brutality, the lies, the broken silence. The story hit the headlines like a bombshell. The city was shaken. The police department rocked to its core. Suddenly, the fight was no longer quiet or hidden. It was out in the open, raw and undeniable. But with the spotlight came new dangers. Retaliation grew fiercer, threats more direct. The line between friend and enemy blurred, and every step forward demanded courage beyond measure. Maya, despite her pain, became a symbol, her broken arm a testament to a brutal truth that could no longer be ignored. And for Officer Grant, the breaking point was only the beginning. The city's streets no longer felt safe, not for Maya, not for Officer Grant, not for anyone who dared to speak the truth. After the explosive news coverage, the glare of public scrutiny burned hotter than ever. Crowds gathered outside the police headquarters, demanding justice with chants that echoed through the concrete canyons of the city. But behind the scenes, the darkness deepened. Grant's phone buzzed incessantly with anonymous calls, threats, warnings, and cold reminders of what happened to those who crossed the line. Each message was a calculated strike, a reminder that the system still held power far beyond the cameras and headlines. At home, Grant found his sanctuary shattered. Tires were slashed on his car, his windows were smashed in the dead of night, and cryptic notes pinned to his door left no doubt they were watching. Maya's family was under siege as well. The once quiet neighborhood was now a battleground of whispered threats and hostile stares. Maya's mother bore the weight of sleepless nights, clutching her daughter's hand with fierce protectiveness even as fear gnawed at her heart. Despite the chaos, Maya's spirit remained unbroken. Her eyes, still clouded with pain from the healing fracture, held a new kind of fire, the fire of resilience. Each day she returned to school, defiant against the whispered rumors and sidelong glances, refusing to let fear define her. Meanwhile, inside the precinct, the internal war raged quietly. Officer Daniels tightened his grip on power, rallying allies with promises of loyalty and vengeance. The blue code of silence reasserted itself like a suffocating noose. But Grant was not alone. A handful of officers, inspired by his courage, began to question the corrupt culture they'd long accepted. Meetings held in shadows, hushed conversations in deserted parking lots, the seeds of rebellion were planted. Still, the stakes climbed higher. One night, as Grant left a meeting with these allies, dark figures emerged from the alleyway. The attack was swift and brutal, a stark message from those desperate to maintain control. Bruised and bloodied, Grant rose, pain slicing through his body but not his spirit. The line had been crossed. He understood now more than ever, justice would come at a steep price, but surrender was not an option. In the shadows, the battle for truth and honor grew fiercer, and as the darkness closed in, the light of hope burned brighter than ever. The city was no longer the same. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating. Every corner, every street seemed to hum with a restless energy, a storm ready to burst. For Maya, the days were long and unforgiving. School had become a battleground. Whispers followed her like shadows, eyes filled with suspicion and thinly veiled hatred. Some classmates avoided her completely, others muttered cruel words that cut deeper than any physical wound. But Maya walked the halls with her head held high, a silent challenge in her gaze. Her broken arm was healing, but the fractures in her world ran far deeper. At home, the weight of the ordeal bore heavily on her family. Her mother's sleepless nights were filled with worry and whispered prayers, clutching old photographs of better times. The pain wasn't just physical, it was the ache of injustice, the sting of watching her child suffer for standing strong. Officer Grant was more determined than ever. His phone was a constant companion, ringing with updates from allies and pleas from those still trapped in fear. The internal pressure from the department was relentless. Every day brought new obstacles, withheld evidence, bureaucratic roadblocks, veiled threats thinly disguised as warnings. But outside the walls of the precinct, a different kind of power was building, a power fueled by the people. The protests had grown larger, more passionate, streets filled with chanting voices demanding accountability, justice, and change. People who had once remained silent found strength in numbers, their anger a roaring flame that refused to be extinguished. Grant found himself at the center of this storm, both as a beacon of hope and a target for those desperate to maintain control. The lines between friend and foe blurred. Allies emerged from unexpected places, community leaders, journalists, even some in law enforcement who saw the truth and could no longer turn away. Yet, the backlash was fierce. One evening, as dust painted the sky in bruised purples and reds, a convoy of police vehicles surrounded a peaceful demonstration. Tensions exploded, tear gas filled the air, screams echoed through the streets, and chaos reigned. Grant was there, trying to hold the line, to protect those who had taken a stand. But the violence was overwhelming. Amid the chaos, a brutal confrontation erupted between Daniels and a young protester. The scene was a mirror of Maya's trauma, magnified by the fury of the crowd. Maya watched the news from her living room, heart pounding. The pain in her arm was nothing compared to the ache in her soul. She knew the fight was far from over. Let's take a short break here. If you're enjoying the story, please subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. We'll be back soon. As the storm raged on, Grant and Maya's paths seemed destined to cross again, their fates intertwined in a battle that was bigger than either of them. The city teetered on the edge of change, but the cost was rising, and the darkness was far from retreating. The city was trembling, but the silence that had once blanketed it was finally breaking. For months, fear had kept many voices muted, but now, with each new headline, with each rally, the walls of silence cracked, slowly, painfully, irrevocably. Maya sat by the window of her small bedroom, watching the rain streak down the glass like tears on a forgotten face. Her arm still ached, a constant reminder of that day, but it was nothing compared to the ache inside her chest. The world outside was changing, but inside, she was still fighting battles far more personal. Her mother hovered close, her face a map of worry and fierce love. "You're stronger than you know," she whispered, but even she struggled to believe it sometimes. Officer Grant's phone never stopped ringing. Each call brought new reports of injustice, new stories of courage, but also fresh threats. He was becoming a symbol, both a hero to some and a target to many. In the shadows of the city, the pressure mounted. Daniels and his allies worked feverishly to silence dissent. Intimidation, blackmail, and carefully orchestrated smear campaigns aimed to crush the growing movement. Yet the people would no longer be silenced. A landmark court hearing was scheduled, promising the first official reckoning. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation, a place where truth and lies would clash under the weight of law and conscience. Grant sat in the front row, Maya's mother by his side, their hands clenched tightly together. Across the room, Daniel stared back, a sneer playing on his lips, a man who believed he was untouchable. The testimony was harrowing. Witnesses recounted the brutality, the lies, the cover-ups. Maya's voice, trembling but resolute, cut through the tension like a blade. Her pain became a rallying cry. Outside, the streets filled with supporters, their chants a thunderous echo of hope and defiance. But justice came at a cost. That night, after the hearing, Grant found his car vandalized beyond recognition. A message was spray-painted on the side in angry red letters, "Keep quiet or else." The warning was clear and chilling. Yet, as the night closed in, Maya looked up at the stars, whispering a promise to herself and to the countless others still waiting for justice: "We will not be broken." The shattered silence had begun to heal, one voice at a time. The city was awakening from its long nightmare, but the path ahead was anything but clear. The courtroom drama had ignited a firestorm. People who had once been silent found courage to speak out. Stories long buried beneath layers of fear and apathy surfaced like ghosts demanding justice. Maya's story became a beacon, a symbol of pain turned into power. Every headline, every televised interview, sent ripples through the community and beyond. Suddenly, the faces of oppression were no longer hidden behind badges and uniforms but exposed to the harsh light of truth. But the fight was far from over. Inside the police department, the fractures grew deeper. Officers who had stood by Daniels began to question their loyalty as pressure mounted. Whispers of resignations and internal investigations filled the corridors. a quiet rebellion brewing beneath the surface. Grant felt the weight of it all. Each day was a battle against exhaustion, doubt, and danger. Yet, in the darkest moments, he found strength in the growing solidarity around him. One evening, as he walked home through the rain-soaked streets, a crowd suddenly appeared, surrounding him with cheers and applause. Strangers offered words of gratitude, their faces filled with hope and resolve. "It's not just about you," an older woman said softly, tears glistening in her eyes. "It's about all of us." But with every victory came a new wave of violence. That night, a nearby community center was set ablaze, an act of terror meant to intimidate and divide. Flames licked at the walls, the smoke choking the night sky as sirens wailed in the distance. Maya's family watched helplessly as the fire consumed a place that had been a refuge for so many. The attack was a brutal reminder that the battle for justice was not just fought in courtrooms and protests, but in the very heart of the community. Yet, even as the flames died down, the embers of resistance glowed brighter. Grant and Maya, bound by shared pain and relentless hope, stood at the forefront of a movement that refused to be crushed. The tides were turning, but the storm was far from over. The morning sun broke over the city like a promise, fragile, yet unwavering. After months of pain, fear, and relentless struggle, the tide was finally turning toward hope. The courtroom was packed. Voices that had once been silenced now spoke boldly, weaving a narrative of truth that no one could deny. Maya sat beside Officer Grant, her arm fully healed, but her spirit forever marked by the fight she had endured. Her eyes shone with a fierce light, one that refused to be dimmed. Daniels, once a towering figure of unchecked power, now faced the weight of justice. The evidence was irrefutable, the testimonies compelling. No longer shielded by the blue uniform, he stood exposed, alone and defeated. Outside, the city held its breath. The crowds that had gathered were no longer angry mobs but a community united in purpose. The chants of protest had softened into songs of victory, of healing. Grant looked at Maya and then at the sea of faces before him, people who had refused to back down, who had chosen courage over fear. "This is only the beginning," he said quietly, "but today, justice has won." For Maya, the scars ran deeper than the visible, yet in those scars lay strength, resilience, and the unshakable belief that no darkness lasts forever. Her mother took her hand, tears streaming down her face, not just from pain, but from the overwhelming relief and pride. The city began to heal, piece by piece. Policies changed, voices were heard, and a new chapter was written, not just for Maya, not just for Grant, but for everyone who had dared to stand up. Justice was no longer a distant dream but a dawning reality. And as the sun climbed higher, casting light on a world still bruised but hopeful, Maya whispered to herself, "We fought, we survived, we won." The dawn of justice had come.